ברוכים הבאים ליום העיון של בית לוחמי הגטאות לציון 30 שנה ליד לילד, שנחנך במאי 1995. שם הכנס הוא אי ההצלה, הצלת ילדים יהודים לפני, בזמן ואחרי השואה. כשצוות יד לילד ודוקטור מלי אייזנברג, מנהלת מחלקת החינוך בבית לוחמי הגטאות, ישבנו ביחד וחשבנו על נושאים לכנס, נראה היה לנו הכי מתאים לעסוק בהצלת ילדים, בשנה שמציינים גם 80 שנה לסוף מלחמת העולם השנייה. בעיקר לאור העובדה שהרבה תוכניות חינוכיות ביד לילד מתמקדות בהצלת ילדים יהודים בזמן וגם אחרי המלחמה. תוכנית הכנס היום עשירה ומגוונת. אנו מקווים שהכנס ירחיב את הידע שלנו על מבצעי הצלת ילדים יהודים שהחלו כבר שהיטלר עלה לשלטון. ולמרות הקושי, הסכנות והדילמות, המשיכו בפעולות הצלה בתקופת השואה, בכל דרך אפשרית, מאורגנת וגם לא. ובסוף המלחמה התארגנו לסוג אחר של הצלה, שכלל גם גאולה ושיקום. אני רוצה להודות לכל הדוברים שמשתתפים בכנס היום, וגם לשותפים שלנו, יד לילד צרפת, דוקטור בועז כהן ודוקטור ורנה בוזה מהמכללה האקדמית גליל מערבי, שהם גם אחראים על הפרויקט Children of War, Genocide and the Holocaust. אני גם רוצה להודות ליגאל כהן, מנכ"ל בית לוחמי הגטאות, ולדוקטור מלי אייזנברג על התמיכה והעזרה בהפקת הכנס היום. וגם אתמול, דרך אגב, היה גם אתמול. תודה גדולה לצוות יד לילד, שבזכות העבודה המקצועית והרגישה והתמסרות להוראת השואה לדור הצעיר, אנו מקיימים את הכנס היום. ולבסוף, אני רוצה להודות לכל השורדים שהיו ילדים בתקופת השואה, ותרמו להקמת יד לילד. רובם כבר לא בחיים לצערי, אבל הם ממשיכים להיות השראה ומקור כוח, ונמשיך לספר את הסיפור שלהם ולהעביר אותם לדור הצעיר. עכשיו אני מתכבדת להזמין את יגאל כהן, מנכ"ל בית לוחמי הגטאות, לשאת דברי פתיחה. יגאל?
תודה רבה מידין, אורחים, חברים ושותפים יקרים. אני נרגש לפתוח את הכנס לציון 30 שנים לייסודו של יד לילד, המוזיאון המיוחד והייחודי בעולם כולו, בעצם הנגשתו את סיפור הילד היהודי בשואה לילדים בגילם, אך גם לילדים בנפשם. ומעצם היותו, מוזיאון המספר את סיפור השואה לילדים צעירים. יד לילד מציין 30 שנה להיווסדו. אך אני מרגיש כי מקום זה נושא איתו חוכמה וניסיון חיים של שנים רבות. חיים שלמים של שורדי שואה, שהיו ילדים בתקופת המלחמה והשואה, והתבגרו וחוו תיקון והשלמה לילדותם, בעצם ליווים את יד לילד מיום היווסדו ועד היום. דבר זה מקבל משמעות גדולה עוד יותר, במפנה הדורות בו אנו נמצאים, כאשר השורדים היחידים שנשארו איתנו, היו בעצמם ילדים בתקופת השואה, ומלחמת העולם השנייה. יד לילד מאיר בזרקור, מחנכים מעוררי השראה, יאנוש קורצ'אק וסטפה וישינסקה, שהם עבורנו דמויות מופת חינוכיות, המלוות אותנו עד היום. אני מרגיש יראת כבוד ותחושת גאווה ושליחות, להמשיך ולהוביל יחד עם חבריי וחברותיי לצוות, ועם שותפים רבים מהארץ ומהעולם, את יד לילד שעוד שנים רבות של יצירה עשירה ומגוונת. כזאת שתיגע בליבם ובנפשם של הצעירים והצעירות, ותוביל אותם ללמידה והבנה, ובעיקר ליצירת חברה טובה יותר. אני רוצה להודות מעומק ליבי לכל חבריי בצוות, בבית לוחמי הגטאות, ובמיוחד לדוקטור מלי אייזנברג, מנהל חטיבת החינוך, למדין שחר ולכל חברות צוות יד לילד, שלקחו חלק ביצירתו של הכנס. תודה לעדה טושבנק, נשיאת יד לילד צרפת, על השותפות והחברות לאורך כל הדרך. תודה לדוקטור בועז כהן ולחברנו מהאקדמית גליל מערבי על שותפות, מאחל לנו יצירה רבה ומשותפת גם בהמשך. תודה לכל האורחים, המרצים ואנשי האקדמיה ששותפים לכנס זה ומשתפים את מחקרם ועבודתם בנושא זה. תודה גדולה לכל הוגה וחולמי רעיון הקמת יד לילד, ולכל מי שלקח חלק בהוצאתו לפועל. ותודה לכל מי שתרם ואפשר את הפעילות הענפה ולאגודות הידידים שתמכו ותרמו להקמת המקום המיוחד הזה. מאחל לכולנו שנים רבות של יצירה, והגשמת חלומות, והמשך העברת הסיפור האנושי של הילד בשואה ולאחריה. מאחל לנו ימים שקטים וטובים במהרה, ובעיקר שכל חטופינו יוחזרו הביתה ובהקדם. תודה רבה.
תודה רבה, יגאל, באמת מילים מחממות את הלב. אנחנו ביד לילד באמת בהרגשה שמגשימים חלומות כמה שאפשר, ואתה באמת מאפשר את זה. אני רוצה להמשיך עם הדוברת הבאה. עדה טושבנד, נשיאת יד לילד צרפת, נשאה דברי פתיחה באנגלית בכנס הבינלאומי שהתקיים אתמול, וכרגע אנחנו נעלה את ההקלטה שתוכלו לשמוע גם אתם את דבריה.
First of all, I would like to explain what is the association Yad Layeled France, l'Enfant et la Shoah. It was founded in 1995, the same year than Yad Layeled in Israel. We produce educational tools for children who are between 9 and 12 years old, inspired by the teaching skills in Israel. Those tools circulate in numerous schools all over France, telling the stories of children who survived the Holocaust. Now, I wanted to speak, of course, about the Jewish children in France during the Holocaust. During World War II, France experienced a paradoxical situation regarding Jewish children. On the one hand, Vichy was a collaborationist government that sometimes went beyond the demands of the Nazi occupation authorities. On the other hand, it had a particularly high rescue rate compared to other Western European countries. Indeed, the French police participated in the arrest of entire families whose children, often of parents who had recently arrived in France, were themselves French citizens. A particularly tragic and unique episode in the history of the Holocaust occurred in the Loiret camp in July 1942, when children were forcibly separated from their mothers after the Veldiv roundup, abandoned to a few nurses, and finally deported to Birkenau in convoys of adults. Between 1942 and 1944, more than 11,000 Jewish children were deported from France and exterminated. Some were still infants and rounded up from the maternity ward of the Rothschild Hospital in Paris. Others, 324 in number, were intentionally arrested by Alois Brünner, the Nazi commandant of the Drancy camp, in various Jewish institutions to be deported on the last convoy to Birkenau on July 31, 1944. On the other hand, France was particularly important place of rescue. This was thanks to specific initiatives, neighbors, friends, and strangers who took in children, including police officers who had warned of an imminent arrest. It was also thanks to networks of Jewish, Catholic, Protestant, and secular institutions, as well as the Paris Mosque. Thus, 3/4 of France's Jews were saved, including many children hidden. The French government only acknowledged in 1995 France's responsibility for the deportation of Jews with President Jacques Chirac's speech at the annual ceremony commemorating the Veldiv roundup. For the previous generation of leaders who have lived through the occupation, the Vichy government was not the Republic, and therefore not France. But a large part of the French population knew during the war how to uphold the humanist Republican values learned in schools or those of the Gospels by helping Jews in danger. As anti-Semitism is once again making itself heard loudly, Yad Layeled France encourages teachers, though through its educational tools, to show this bright side of the history of the Holocaust in France, without ignoring the suffering experienced by Jews, particularly by deported or hidden children. In this way, the hope is to raise awareness among the younger generation about the value of human life, respect for others, and the importance of justice, solidarity, and mutual aid. Thank you.
זהו, אני מתכבדת להזמין את דוקטור מלי אייזנברג, מנהלת מחלקת החינוך בבית לוחמי הגטאות, לשאת דברים. בבקשה, מלי.
אוקיי, תודה רבה, מדין. מוזיאון יד לילד הוקם במטרה ליצור מפגש ראשוני, חווייתי, עם עולמם של הילדים שחיו בתקופת השואה. המוזיאון ראשון מסוגו, מפגיש קהל צעיר מאוד, החל מגיל 9, עם תקופת השואה מבעד לעיניהם של ילדים שחוו אותה. התצוגות במוזיאון מבוססות על סיפורים אותנטיים שלוקטו מתוך יומנים ועדויות של ילדים שחיו באותה תקופה. ניצול השואה, הסופר ואיש הרוח אהרון אפלפלד, טען לפני כמה שנים, ואני מצטטת, כי אם רוצים להעביר נושא כבד כמו השואה, צריכים להשתמש בדברים אינטימיים. האינטימיות נוצרת בסיפור האישי, אבל האינטימיות גדולה יותר, משמעותית יותר, מתאפשרת באמצעות האומנות. אתה ברור, אני ממשיכה את הציטוט, אתה ברור כי התפקיד הקשה הזה של שימור הזיכרון והעברתו לדורות הבאים לא יכול להיעשות בידי ההיסטוריוגרפיה בלבד. יש צורך בתובנות נוספות כדי להניף את המסע הטעון הזה. אסור להשאיר את השואה בתחומם של המספרים הגדולים והדיבור המוכלל. העדים וההיסטוריונים הניחו את המסע ואת הטפחות, ועתה הגיעה שעתה של היצירה. עתה הגיעה השעה לפורר את האימה למראות ולמילים. סוף ציטוט. יד לילד הקדים את זמנו, שכן כבר מראשיתו שילב את האומנות בעשייתו היומיומית, ביצירה, סדנאות, תיאטרון ועוד, ועל כך נשמע בהמשך. אחת התערוכות שמוצגות במוזיאון ומבטאות את אותה משנה חינוכית של יד לילד, היא התערוכה רסיסים של אור, של האומנית רונית אונונו. בתערוכה מוצגת סדרה של 13 ציורי שמן, בהשראת תצלומים של ילדים שנספו בשואה. הציורים מבוססים על תצלומים היסטוריים, שהאומנית מצאה בארכיונים באינטרנט, ואותם ציירה במטרה להוקיר את חייהם האבודים של הילדים. סגנון הציור הוא נאיבי, עם אופי תמים, ציור חם עם הבעה עזה, צבעונית מאוד. מטרתה של האומנית לתת חיים לאותם ילדים, להשיב להם את היכולת לספר את סיפורם, להזכיר לעולם שגם הם רקמו חלומות, היו להם תקוות וסודות. הציורים שואפים להטיל אור קטן משלנו, לנגד הצלילים האפילים של ההיסטוריה. עבודותיה מעניקות אפוא מימד של אנושיות, של אינטימיות, שקודם לכן הזכרנו בדבריו של אפלפלד. תערוכה חדשה שתוצג ממש בקרוב ביד לילד ומבטאת אף היא את ייחודיותו של המוזיאון, היא תערוכה המבוססת על אוסף של 27 ציורים מאת צורדת השואה פאני בן עמי, גיבורת הספר המפקדת הקטנה מאת גליל ארון פדר, שהתקבלו אלינו לארכיון. הציורים מתעדים את מסעה האישי של פאני, שבנערותה הובילה באומץ 15 ילדים יהודים מצרפת אל מעבר לגבול שוויץ והצילה את חייהם. בני משפחתה של פאני בחרו להפקיד את האוסף בידינו בארכיון, והוא צפוי כאמור להיות מוצג בתערוכה חדשה שתיפתח באוקטובר ביד לילד. ולצידה תתקיים סדנת אומנות חינוכית בהשראת הציורים. אני רוצה להודות מקרב לב לכל מי שלקח חלק בכנס הזה, לשותפים שלנו מיד לילד צרפת, לדוקטור בועז קון מהמכללה האקדמית גליל מערבי, למדין שחר, רכזת הכנס, למרצים, ובעיקר לצוות ההדרכה של יד לילד, על שותפותו בכנס זה ועל עבודתו המסורה והמקצועית מזה שנים רבות. תודה רבה ובהצלחה.
תודה רבה, מלי, ואני מאוד מתרגשת לקראת עוד תערוכה חדשה ועוד תוכנית חינוכית. מצד שני, זה תמיד עצוב להיפרד מתערוכה שאנחנו כבר מכירים ואנחנו עובדים איתה ומתחברים עליה. אבל תודה, ממש מרגש. אני מתכבדת להזמין את דוקטור אליוט נידם אורייטו לשאת את הרצאת הפתיחה של הכנס, שתהיה באנגלית, ולפני שהוא מתחיל, כמה מילים עליו שגם באנגלית. Dr. Elliot Nidam Orvieto is head of the Academic Affairs section at Yad Vashem's International Institute for Holocaust Research. Dr. Nidam Orvieto is responsible for Yad Vashem's project on the Vatican and the Church. His expertise is on Roman Catholic religious communities and their responses during the Holocaust. His forthcoming book is Behind Their Walls, The Hiding of Jews in Roman Catholic Religious Institutions in France. Is slated to be published this year in 2025. Congratulations, Elliot. He is also the acting national coordinator of European Holocaust Research Infrastructure in Israel. And with that, Elliot, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to come and speak with you. today. I must say, I wish it was a week conference because of all the interesting things I've been hearing and listening to, and I wish it would continue because it's absolutely fascinating. Before I begin, I would like to mention that there are certain terms that you will hear me throughout this presentation say, which is the term religious. Religious in the Roman Catholic understanding is not an adjective here, it is a noun. And it refers to those individuals who have abide by the evangelical counsels of poverty, chastity, and obedience, live in communities and under a religious superior. And so there are many different kinds of congregations you will hear, and many of you in France and in Israel have seen all different kinds of nuns and monks, etc., walking around. And so at the moment, I would like to open up my PowerPoint here. So you want to have an understanding of what I'm talking about, of the complexities of religious congregations, especially when we're talking about the war. I wish to point out, if you look here, this is a list of 32 pages long just for women's congregations in France. I mean, and the congregations in the world. Many congregations during World War II were in France or were founded in France. So you're talking about approximately over 500 to 600 different kinds of women's congregations alone that existed during the war in France. And so when we're talking about it throughout the lecture, you have an idea of the numbers that we're talking. Let us begin. In 1946, Evelyn Friedman, later Schenken, was sent by the Beit Din in London to retrieve Jewish children who remained in non-Jewish families and in Roman Catholic religious institutions in France. In her book, Gathering Remnants, she writes about two girls who remained in a convent of nuns who had the official guardianship of the children. Yet fearing the girls might be baptized, she presented herself to the convent as the girl's aunt from the United States, saying that she was the aunt's next-door neighbor. And hearing that she was coming to France, she asked her to come and visit the girls, which was all a ruse. She mentioned that the Mother Superior was quite receptive of her, and she asked the Mother Superior if she could take the girls out for the afternoon. The Mother Superior granted, and she took the girls. She did not bring the girls back to the convent. The girls were soon taken to a Jewish children's home and there brought back to Judaism. After the war, many people began searching for children and in families, and many came to religious institutions searching for Jewish children. It was a primary concern of many of the Jewish community that these children, who had been placed primarily by their parents, relatives, neighbors, etc., were to be found. And I say that it was the primary concern for this because in the majority of cases, although not exclusively, those who were brought by Jewish organizations to convents and religious institutions were easily tracked because the organizations kept records of where the children had been placed. However, the post-war Jewish community lacked the information about where parents, relatives, neighbors had placed children. So it became a major network trying to find where these children were. Because of the pain that the Jewish community had experienced during the Holocaust, they were hoping to find thousands of children. Unfortunately, they did not find them. One of the presumptions was, of course, that the convents took them and converted them in great numbers. And this is despite the fact that the OSE, the Children's Aid Society, already in early 1945, had put the number of children remaining in religious institutions to around 211. You say 211, that might be kind of shocking. It certainly was to me. And then you began thinking about it. The number is somewhat problematical because it doesn't tell who they are counting. And when you look at who was in the convents, we have to ask this question. Were they full Jews, meaning were both parents Jewish? Were these children children of mixed marriage family, one Jewish, one being non-Jewish. Were these children actually children of Catholics whose parents had converted before them or their grandparents, because they too were needed to be in hiding? Were these orphan children they were counting, meaning full orphans, both mother and father are deceased? Or were they half orphans? There are many questions to this number. When I went through the different congregations in France, looking through their archives, I can tell you the number is a little problematical because of the records that the religious communities kept about who they had hidden. It is important not to acknowledge, however, that there are many preconceptions we have about what went on during this time and what went on in religious institutions, and how did the church understand the notion of guardianship and responsibility. We have in this presentation, I want to look at guardianship from two different perspectives, from the Catholic point of view, to understand the difficulties and the problems and complexities of retrieving children after the war. I would like to look at documents from the hierarchy, both during the war and after the war, and I would like to talk about how did the religious convents understand the notion of guardianship and custody. Regarding custody and guardianship, there are different grades and types of it. There is partial guardianship. There is full guardianship. There is an informal agreement allowing a person to take care of a child or someone else. And then there is the formal agreement, meaning it's done through the legal system or through the courts. During the war, we have to acknowledge that all placements of Jewish children were arranged by informal agreements between the religious and between the parents or whoever was placing the children into the institutions. They were informal because they were not legal. They did not go through the court systems. It's impossible, absolutely impossible to do such a thing. In some cases, parents simply just left the child at the steps of the convent. Sometimes they threw them in the door during the roundups. Sometimes they had no time to speak. Sometimes there was an oral agreement. But I can tell you the problem with informal agreements is that they leave a lot of details out. The details are in limbo. They are in an abyss. They're without clear answers what to do if a problem arises, such as the post-war. What do you do when the parents die or don't come back from the relatives, neighbors, or whatever? What do you do if the religious, the sister, the nun, the brother, the friar, whoever it be, decided to keep the child for whatever reason? Keep the child in school, to keep the child because he was an orphan, or maybe because the child was baptized. Yet during the war, we see there were many attempts also to make an informal agreement look as formal as possible, despite everything. And I'm going to show you a document here. We find this is what I would call a guardianship form, an informal guardianship form that looks very formal. We have found 27 of these forms in the convent of Massip near Toulouse. This is in the religious congregation of the Company of Marie, Our Lady. One of the things you notice about this form is that we find of the 27, it only equals about 1/3 of the children hidden. Why only 1/3? We really don't know. But in the document, it does clearly state that the parents relinquish their parental rights to Monsignor Saliège, the Bishop of Toulouse. And I would like to give a translation of it, since it's very hard to read also in the PowerPoint in French. I, the undersigned, father of whoever, declare to delegate the custody of this child to Monsignor Saliège, Archbishop of Toulouse, or to his successors. I authorize them to entrust, if they consider it useful, to a person or charitable association or institution of their choice, in the event that I should die. or render incapable of exercising all rights of paternal power. I delegate under conditions all my rights of paternal power. As soon as circumstances allow me to take the child back, the custody of the child and all rights of paternal power will be restored to me. Now, there are certain things we have to notice in this document. Firstly, it looks very legal. It looks like a legal document. It has a seal of France from before the war. It has a code number at the top. It has the real names of everybody. It has the date. It's stamped, etc. Basically, like I said, it is an informal document because it didn't go through the court system that looks very formal and legal. Secondly, we notice in the document, the signer gives away the parental rights over to the bishop or to his successor, whoever that might be. Yet the transfer of rights, if we notice in the document correctly, take effect only when the person can no longer exercise the rights or dies, which means the parental rights still remained with the parent until such time. And it's sort of, in many ways, we would call it more like foster care nowadays, if you would think. Thirdly, the document sees a very traditional pattern of how the church behaved and saw guardianship, meaning that the parents are the only ones mentioned here if they return to take the child. In this form, if the parents die or do not return, the bishop keeps the child. And it is very important to know that in the post-war period, this also reflected French law at the time, from before the war, that basically it was a deathbed confession that you would give the child over because the parent died. It was sort of a last will in some ways. It is interesting to note that in this document, there is no mention of baptism at all, which you would assume because it's a church document, but it really isn't a church document. It doesn't have any crosses. There's nothing about it. It looks legal, purely legal. What we have to understand from the post-war testimonies about the ones that we have of this document, we realize that of the few examples that we have, the parents did survive and the parents did come back and take the children. Unfortunately, I have not found any cases where we have testimonies of other children whose parents had died during this time. Possibly that's because they just haven't been found, but possibly it is because the children remained within the realms of the church. Most church Jews who remained within the church did not so much give testimonies after the war about their experience, although some did. You might ask, were there any other documents like this? Do we have it anywhere else? And actually, we do find references to a document very similar when the children were taken out of Vénissieux camp in August of 1942. Over 100 children were removed clandestinely under the eyes of the Germans because of a paperwork issue, basically. And these children that were taken out of the camp, the parents had to sign mimeograph forms relinquishing their parental rights to Cardinal Gélier of Lyon. The looking of understanding of guardianship in the post-war period is also important to look at from a hierarchical point of view. And I would like to mention the next document. This document comes about because in 1946, Angelo Roncalli, the nuncio, or we call it ambassador, from the Holy See in Rome, was in Paris. He was the ambassador to France. Roncalli began asking, what do we do with the children who are hidden in religious institutions and in Catholic families? He posed this question because Rabbi Herzog approached him to ask what to do and where was he going to go in helping the children. So he was very concerned about how does he respond to Rabbi Herzog of Jerusalem. So he wrote a letter to the Holy Office in Rome. The Holy Office began to make a response. And in July 19th, 1946, they wrote a response with the approval of Pius XII. And this is basically the response, which we'll go over. This letter became very popular and came to the fore, so to speak, in December of 2004, when Alberto Meloni found a copy of it in French and published it in Corriere della Sera, about saying that Pius XII wrote to Nunzio Roncalli saying that Jewish children should not be returned. But what we see in the article that Meloni wrote and what we do find in the actual Vatican archives is slightly different. And so we're going to concentrate on what we found in the Vatican archives. I have to tell you, we have a translation, and I did not show the original document because this is not permitted by the Holy for the Apostolic Archives unless you pay to show it even in a PowerPoint presentation such as today. So we only have the translation here. I would like to point out that in this, we see certain things. They are very concerned about the handing over of Jewish children to Jewish institutions. In the first paragraph, you see in yellow about this issue. He also writes that eminent fathers decided that the request of the Grand Rabbi of Jerusalem should not be answered. If it were possible, in any case, if anything, it should be basically orally and not written down because they were afraid of danger and distortion that might be made in the writing. Now, you might say this is a little odd, and why didn't they want to write it down? Well, actually, you do find that this is very common among church documentation. They don't like to write things down. They like things more orally because they are afraid of this. And it is a very common comment ever since the French Revolution, actually. He also does mention about the baptized. And it says very clearly that the baptized children should be given to institutions to secure their Catholic upbringing. The question is which baptized children are they talking about? All of them, or only those whose relatives do not come back? And this becomes to be the big question actually between the article that was published by Meloni and what we find in the Vatican archives. In the article that Meloni found using the French, he found that the article only mentioned parents, that they could only be returned to the parents. So he translated it to parents. However, in the Italian original, it uses the term parenti, relatives. So we have to make a distinction. Although parents can also be relatives, as we do know, Meloni does translate it particularly only as parents. But the Italian does clearly state that the children can be returned, even if baptized, to relatives. However, it says that if the child was thinking of conversion, not only that he was converted, but he was thinking of conversion, he should remain in the arms of the church. It also was very concerned about the idea of giving children over because they said the parents had originally given them to us or whoever, and that's how they had them. So why should we hand them over to another institution? He makes it very clear that all of this agreement and what he's writing to Roncalli, meaning the Holy Office writing to Roncalli, has the approval of Pius XII, and it was given. What is very interesting about this document is that it was never given and passed on to the convents. The convents never received it. So the convents had no clue about any of what this is, either about the relatives giving or about keeping or whatever. It just was not given. But we do have an idea of what was the Holy See's understanding of giving the children back. We do have to say one thing that we did find in 1942 in Canada, and I understand some of you are from Canada here tonight. In Canada, we do find the instructions in 1942 of what to do with children who are baptized in hospitals for emergency. And what does it say to the nuns to do? And it makes it very clear that they should remain in the arms of the church, etc. However, it says only with the parents' permission. And if it is if the parents disagree or it becomes not a pleasant situation, let's say, no mention should be about the baptism at all, and you should give the children back without doing it, because you do not want to bring the harm to the Catholic hospitals, to the nuns, or to the church. So it's very interesting to see that. One of the things that we also want to point out when looking at these kind of document and going to the convents or not going to the convents in this case, we realize that the hierarchy left very little help, did not help greatly the convents both during the war and after the war and their decision making. So a lot had to be based on what did the convent actually think and what was their common practice in doing it. So for the local communities, when we're talking about the religious communities, all the different ones we've mentioned at the beginning, and even the local houses, much depended on the superior and their decision of how to handle the return of children when approached. The superior, or the person assigned to take care of the Jews during the war, often had to make these very one-minute decisions, whether to allow it, whether not to allow it, etc. In communities and operations, we see that they commonly continued to do what they've always done. And we have to then ask, well, what did communities always do? We have to remember that convents have been taking care of children for hundreds of years, and particularly poor, abandoned children. So what was the custom? What rules did they follow? Because they also followed these during the war as well. And we find out that in many cases, what they did, first of all, was whoever brought the child to the institution was allowed to have the child back. Meaning, if a Jewish organization or a non-Jewish organization, a rescue network, whether it be a body network or the Garel network or whoever brought the child to the convent to hide, if the representative of that organization, rescue network, came to collect it, often they got it because they brought it. Or the parent, if the parent brought it, then the parent gets it. But like I mentioned earlier, informal agreements have problems, and it brings a lot of abyss and a lot of question when something happens, like the parents die. So a relative comes to collect the child. This leads to a big question. You didn't bring it, so how do we work it? How do we give the child back? Do we not give the child back? This became the big question of many religious institutions, and based on their individual person and responsibility who was responsible. So you find an array of differences. Not every house, not every congregation acted the same. It's a world of difference, and they had a lot of problems in trying to figure out what to do, and they had a lot of problems with the difficult difficult complexities they had with children that they had received. For instance, the Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul, in one of their houses, they received 2 Jewish girls. They took care of them all the way up to about the liberation, but the convent was destroyed. So how do you take care of the children? So what did they do? They put it in an ambulance going to Paris and said, go meet your mother and father. We can't take care of you anymore. That was at the time of the liberation. We see also religious institutions staying with the Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul. We had several Jewish girls who were baptized, who were about to receive their first communion after the war. The girls were very excited to wear the white dress, to have their first communion. They were really thrilled about having the ceremony. And then the Sister General of the congregation writes to the community or notifies them by telephone and said, these girls are not to receive first communion. These are Jewish girls and they should be returned to the Jewish community. That was the mother's decision of the congregation. So it varied. The local community was going ahead with it, while someone else said higher up, no. We see the Fathers of Zion, en Rue de Bac in Paris, create Le Service des Enfants, in which they had to deal with the children whom they'd hid. Now, the Fathers of Zion hid around 460 recorded children that we know of that they hid. Now, of these 460 children, we do know that already they began to start handing them back as soon as possible. In October 1944, they already had returned 60, and it was written in the Jewish Telegraph Journal that they'd already started handing back. We know that by the end of the year, they had handed back of the 300 that remained, 360 or whatever that remained, they were now down to 212, and it's so until June 1947, where only 12 children remained in their care. And of these 12 children, it leads to our problems of complexity. Half of them, their parents were alive. The parents had decided to keep them in the convent, one, to continue their education, but two, they could not afford the life outside. We have all sorts of other cases where you have hospitals of poor and convents that were very poor and could not afford things, began to turn Jews back, where schools that had more money, Catholic schools that had more money, were willing to keep the children because they could afford them and they could stay there. So you had a diversity of what was going on. I would like to point out some of the more problematical issues. For instance, we had Fanny Haït, or Haidt, however you wish to pronounce it. Fanny was hidden by the Fathers of Zion in 1943 and then until the end of the war. She was returned to her aunt. We do know from correspondence found in the convent that she had a real problem with her aunt because her aunt did not accept her conversion, and Fanny wanted to remain Catholic and practice Catholicism since she had been baptized. So it led to a great problem and a conflict between her and the aunt. So the congregation tried to help as best they could. And Fanny remained in the hands of the convent that she was staying at for about 2 more years after the war. Eventually, she just left. Why? Because she decided to try Judaism. So it didn't stay the same. The individual decided in this case. So she left and she went back, and we know this. We have an interesting case here, which I like to show some of the complexity here. We have a little girl who was born during the war. A family brought her, a man and woman brought her to the convent of the Fathers of Zion, for example. They brought her and they said, would you hide this child? After the war, the Fathers of Zion contacted the family, the man and woman, and said, please come and get your child. They said, it's not our child. It doesn't belong to us. A Jewish woman gave us this child. We're Catholic. A Jewish woman gave us this child and told us to take it to you, and we thought you were going to adopt it out. And he said, we're not an adoption agency. Come and collect the child. Or go to the mother, find her, and have her sign the payment, etc. Now, one of the things that you have in such things, in cases, for instance, this one I'm mentioning, is that the mother signed the child over to the convent. And I began wondering what would bring a mother to do this. After all that had done, what had brought this to happen? And we realized when doing some investigation, the mother actually was an unwed mother. Happens in life, normal part of life. She was an unwed mother in her late teens, basically. And she, after the war, had gotten married, and she didn't want people to know about her first life, the life before. So she wanted to get rid of the child. So eventually, actually, this Catholic couple adopted the baby, etc. One of the things I wanted to put out with this document here that I'm showing you too is request for baptism. And we see that in many cases during the war, parents had to sign wishing their child to be baptized. This leads to one of the last cases I wish to point out some of the complexities. During the war, we see one of the cases is that in the convent, should I say, the mother had baptized the child to save it, and hopefully the Germans would not arrest her or the child. So the child was baptized. After the war, the father miraculously had survived Auschwitz. When he came back, and he said, "What do you mean? My child is baptized? I do not want to see the child. I do not want to see you or see anything else. That is done. It died in Auschwitz. I don't want it." So he left the child in the church, basically. So a lot of problems, and the church had, and the religious had to deal with these situations. You had also, as I alluded to earlier, where you had parents who could not afford to take the children back. We see cases where mothers brought the child back from the convent, but only to return them after the war, after some time after the war, because they could not afford them. Or their other children came back from different camps and they had to take them. So the complexities is very problematical. It's not a simple, yes, this is what was done and that isn't what was done. This community did this and that community did that. This is the way it was. So in this, I hope you have gotten an understanding of some of the issues and the complexities and crises that went on during the post-war period in trying to bring back, receive, and reintegrate Jewish children from the religious institutions. Now, as I mentioned, this is only about basically guardianship point of views and not about the personal and the psychological aspects. That's for another lecture. So I hope this has been informative to you. Thank you.
תודה רבה, אליוט. הרצאה מרתקת ועצובה, אני חייבת להגיד. לגלות את המורכבות הזאת של סוף המלחמה, וילד שניצל, ולפעמים פשוט לא מוצאים את הבית. אני לא רואה שאלות, ואני שוב פעם מזמינה אנשים לשאול שאלות, אפשר גם לשאול בעברית שאלות, רק ההרצאה של אליוט באנגלית היום, אבל היה לי חשוב להביא את אליוט לתת את ההרצאה. אני חושבת שהוא הציף דברים שאולי אנחנו פחות מכירים, שמדברים על גאולת ילדים ושיקום. אנחנו לפעמים לא מדברים על הסיפורים, שילדים הולכים לאיבוד, או לא באים לקחת אותם. אני רציתי לשאול שאלה. האם אתה רואה קשר בין החזרת ילדים לארגונים או למשפחות, או מי שבא לאסוף אותם, לבין ארגון שאולי קיבל חסידי אומות העולם? זאת אומרת, האם אתה ראית קשר שדווקא היו מוכנים להחזיר את הילדים, כי גם היו מוכנים לקבל אותם ללא תמורה?
Right. Well, let me put it things about this. One of the issues about children coming back and retrieving and connection to righteous among the nations is you do have some children who had very good experiences in the convent, and they felt very well protected. And they wanted people to be recognized, whether it's a religious or a regular person, to be recognized as righteous among the nations. And sometimes we do find, however, when you're collecting the data, which is a very interesting thing for me, of course, I'm a puzzle maker or a puzzle trying to put pieces together, is that you realize in the testimony sometimes from the religious that came, they had no understanding of what the Jews were going through. Absolutely not. And one of them really struck me when she apologized to the children, even though the woman is, "Oh, thank you so much, and this is what you did," etc. And she said, "I am so sorry I was mean to you. I didn't know. I had no clue about the suffering that you were going through." So you have this. You do also have to understand that not everyone had a great experience. They might recognize someone as righteous from the different groups, and you might, and you find complexities even with girls who were in convents who might praise the convent, but very upset with the Jewish organization that came and collected them. We even have one, she even slapped Musa Abadi, or Musa Abadi slapped her. I mean, it was not a very pleasant situation, but everybody is individual in this case, in every situation. So it's very hard to
make a generalization, נכון? אני גם חושבת שאנחנו צריכים להבין שאנחנו מדברים על ילדים. דרך אגב, אנחנו במושב האחרון נדבר על ההצגות, ואחת ההצגות באמת מציגה את הסיפור של לאה פריד, והסיפור שלה במנזר, ובדיוק היה לה אם המנזר שאמרה בדיוק אותם הדברים. אני מצטערת על מה שעשיתי, זה מה שידעתי. אז ושוב אני רוצה להגיד לאלי תודה רבה על ההרצאה שחשפה אותנו למורכבות, באמת למורכבות של הצלת ילדים, ובמקרה הזה בצרפת.